Welcome to Grave Whispers. I've sifted through case files, newspaper clippings, and overlooked details to piece these stories together. Some of the cases you'll recognize, others you may not have heard of, but all hold something worth uncovering. What I found isn't always neat, and it isn't always complete, but it's real, and now it's yours to hear. In March of 1996, Albuquerque, New Mexico woke to a crime unlike anything the city had seen. At first, it was just fragments, a video store left unlocked, a set of grandparents who never made it home, rumors of something far worse underneath it all. But within hours, the pieces came together into one of the darkest weekends in the city's history. 5 lives ended. 3 in a video store office, 2 in the mountains east of town, and a community left to wonder how it had happened. Before we begin, a warning. This story involves graphic violence and the murder of 5 innocent people. To understand how that weekend became possible, we need to step back, years before the killings, to the lives of the 2 people who would walk into Hollywood Video that night. Esther Beckley's past is the hardest to trace. Some accounts suggest she had been sentenced to 6 years in prison for drug trafficking, though the specifics of her early charges aren't very clear in official records. What is clear is this. By early 1996, Beckley was back on the streets of Albuquerque with the label of an ex-offender. Her time in prison left marks, though not the kind that reformers hope for. There is little evidence that her first sentence rehabilitated her. Instead, she returned to the city more vulnerable than before, her life marked by poverty, instability, and poor choices in the men she attached herself to. Shane Glenn Harrison's history, on the other hand, is painfully clear. Known as Slick, Harrison had already built a reputation as a violent repeat offender before his mid-20s. His rap sheet was long, his crimes escalating. He had been sentenced to 10 years for armed robbery, but served only 4 before release. He was more than just a man with a criminal record. He was someone who had lived inside the system for years, and someone who was already considered dangerous long before 1996. Harrison also carried another weight, paranoid schizophrenia. He had been prescribed medication, but by the time of the Hollywood Video killings, he wasn't taking it. Combined with his drug use, it left him volatile, paranoid, and capable of extreme violence. Both Harrison and Beckley carried their prison histories with them when their paths finally crossed. Not in a prison yard, but in an experimental program meant to give offenders a second chance. New Mexico has long wrestled with crime rates that are higher than the national average. By the early 1980s, overcrowded prisons pushed the state to try something new. In 1982, lawmakers passed the Adult Community Corrections Act. It created a system of community-based programs designed to move certain felony offenders out of prison cells and into structured supervision within the community. The idea was simple: reduce prison crowding and give offenders treatment, housing, and work support that might steer them away from reoffending. Participants were expected to follow strict rules: drug tests, steady employment, curfews, no drugs, no alcohol, and certainly no weapons. Programs varied by location, but usually included counseling, substance abuse treatment, and help finding housing or a job. Oversight came from the Probation and Parole Division, which contracted local providers and monitored progress. On paper, the program seemed like a sensible way to balance punishment with rehabilitation, but it came with sharp limits, at least in theory. Those convicted of violent crimes, such as murder or sexual assault, were supposed to be ineligible. Anybody considered too high risk was to be kept out. Noncompliance, repeat violations, or behavior that endangered public safety should have meant immediate removal. But the policy shifted over time. By 1989, new legislation allowed even some offenders with firearm-related crimes to enter the program. And with that change, the system opened a door that would prove disastrous. In 1994, Shane Harrison was selected for the program. He had served only 4 years of his 10-year sentence. His parents stepped in to help, even paying for him to live in an apartment near the University of New Mexico so he could rebuild his life under supervision. The terms were clear: follow the rules, stay clean, stay out of trouble. A month later, 40-year-old Esther Beckley was also placed in the program. During her first class, she met John Lascelles, a newly released inmate who had once offered Harrison protection inside prison. Lascelles began spending time with Harrison on the outside, and before long, Esther did too. She started spending more and more time at Harrison's apartment, and within weeks, their paths became entangled. By February 1996, Esther was spending most of her time at Shane's apartment. Their relationship was unstable, part partnership, part survival, part something darker that tethered him to her. On the night of February 21st, that relationship shifted. Esther sat in the small apartment, surrounded by the clutter that often filled Shane's space. He turned to her with what sounded like a casual suggestion. "You want to make some money?" When she asked how, his answer was blunt: robbery. Shane promised it would be easy. Nobody would get hurt. They wouldn't even use real guns. To Esther, it sounded reckless, but survivable. After some hesitation, she agreed. The next day, the two of them went to Walmart. They moved quietly through the aisles, gathering the items they would need: duct tape, several pairs of black gloves, and 2 BB pistols. In 1996, those guns didn't carry the orange safety tip that marks them as replicas today. These BB guns looked almost identical to .45 caliber semi-automatics. To anyone staring down the barrel, they might as well have just been real. On February 23rd, it was just after midnight when Shane and Esther parked outside Mac's Steak in the Rough, a local fast food restaurant. They sat in the car, watching as employees slowly trickled out. One by one, cars left the lot until only the manager remained inside. Shane turned to Esther. It was time. The doors were locked, so they needed a way in. Esther played her part, walking up and pretending to be a woman fleeing an abusive boyfriend. She begged to be let inside. Cautious, but sympathetic, the manager unlocked the door. The moment he turned to reach for the phone, Esther shoved the BB gun into his stomach. His eyes widened. There was no way for him to know it wasn't real. Moments later, Shane slipped through the door, taking control of the scene. Together, they overpowered the manager, binding him with strips of duct tape. They demanded he tell them how to open the safe. Terrified, the manager explained the process. Once they had the information, Shane forced the register open. Inside was just under $1,000. Before leaving, they wound more duct tape around the manager's mouth and eyes, leaving him bound and blind. Then, they disappeared into the night, the stolen cash stuffed into their pockets. The BB guns had done their job. They looked real enough to frighten the manager, real enough to make the robbery possible. But for Shane Harrison, they didn't deliver the rush he craved. Shane had always called himself a gun enthusiast. He studied firearms, bragged about them, treated them as symbols of power. For him, the BB guns weren't just unsatisfying, they were insulting. 2 days after the robbery, on February 25th, he decided to change that. That night, he invited his neighbor Jason to join him on what he would describe as a harmless errand. The two walked into a gun store. Jason assumed it was just curiosity, a way for Shane to window shop and talk weapons with people who knew them well. Shane even reassured him, "I'm not buying anything, just looking." Technically, he wasn't lying. He didn't buy a gun from the store that night, but Shane had already made other connections. He had linked up with a man who claimed to run an import-export business, street code for someone who could supply firearms outside the system. Jason urged him not to follow through, warning him it was dangerous, reckless. Shane brushed it off, and the deal went ahead. Within days, a classified ad appeared for a Tech 9 semi-automatic pistol, the kind of weapon that had already built a reputation in crime circles for its firepower. Shane jumped on it immediately. No hesitation, no second thoughts. By the end of February, Shane had 2 real guns in his possession, a shotgun and the Tech 9. Both were purchased illegally, both were kept hidden in a black duffel bag, and with those purchases, he had already broken the conditions of his release from the reintegration program. No guns, no exceptions. But Shane wasn't worried about the program anymore. He was focused on something bigger, something riskier. Just before 2 in the morning on March 2nd, Shane and Esther pulled into the parking lot of Hollywood Video. Their plan was simple: walk in close to closing time, wait for customers to leave, and stage the robbery just as they had at Max. But when Shane reached the glass doors, he realized he was too late. The manager had already locked up for the night. Shane pounded on the glass, tugged at the handles, insisting he be let in. The employee shook her head, refusing. The store was closed. She wasn't opening the doors. Shane pressed, demanding, asking again and again. The exchange dragged on for a few tense moments. The robbery would have to wait. Shane walked away angry, but he wasn't finished. The plan was only delayed, not abandoned. In the early hours of March 3rd, Shane and Esther slipped into Hollywood Video before closing. They blended in with the last of the customers, wandering the aisles as if they were simply looking for a movie to rent. To anyone watching, they looked like an ordinary couple. When the final customer walked out and the doors were locked for the night, Shane and Esther were still inside. That was when the plan began to unfold. Esther moved first. She approached the assistant manager, 30-year-old Mylin Douthey, pulling out her BB gun. She ordered Mylin into the back office. Once there, she demanded the surveillance tape. Mylin pointed to the VCR, but refused to remove the tape herself. Esther shoved her aside and yanked the cassette free, making sure that whatever happened next would not be caught on camera. As this happened, 19-year-old Zachary Blacklock entered the office, dropping off a set of keys. He froze when he saw the gun. Esther ordered him to stay put, her voice sharp enough to keep him from moving. Meanwhile, Shane had his own role. He approached 18-year-old Jawanda Castillo, who was still on the floor helping wrap up for the night. Calmly, he asked her to show him where the restroom was. Jawanda, unaware of what was happening in the office, agreed. She unlocked the bathroom door for him, only to turn around and see the muzzle of a gun pointed directly at her. Shane told her he didn't need the bathroom. What he needed was her compliance. He marched her down the hallway and into the office, where the others were already being held. With all 3 employees gathered in one room, Shane took control. He demanded to know where the store safe was. They told him it was kept at the front. Shane and Esther then forced the group forward, pushing them towards the register. The employees were terrified, but cooperative. The safe was emptied, the money stuffed into a plastic trash bag. But Shane's paranoia didn't let the robbery stop there. He peered outside through the glass and noticed the parking lot. 3 cars. Too few for the number of people he had inside. Something didn't add up. He turned back to Esther and ordered her to find out who was waiting for a ride home. After a pause, Zachary admitted quietly that his grandparents were on their way. They would be pulling in around 2 a.m. to pick him up. That single admission changed everything. What had begun as a robbery was spiraling towards something far, far darker. Shane wasted no time once he learned Zachary's grandparents were coming. He ordered Esther to intercept them, to make sure they didn't drive away once they arrived. Just after 2 a.m., George and Pauline McDougall pulled into the parking lot. They had made this trip many times before. Pauline was behind the wheel. She didn't like driving after dark, so her husband George rode along to keep her company. Tonight they were there, as always, to pick up their grandson and get him home safely. Esther walked towards the car, rehearsing the story in her head. When she reached the window, she told the McDougals that the manager was still finishing up the nightly drawer count and that she'd been asked to wait outside. Then she added something to make her request sound harmless. Her car's heater was broken. The night was cold, and she wondered if she could wait inside their car until things wrapped up. The McDougals, kind and trusting people, agreed. Pauline unlocked the door. Esther slid into the back seat behind them. She kept her composure, talking casually to fill the silence. She spoke about Zachary, about little things meant to make her presence feel normal. To the McDougals, she was just another young employee waiting out the end of her shift. They had no idea what was unfolding inside the store only yards away. Because while Esther kept them distracted in the car, Shane had finished emptying the safe. He marched Mylin, Zachary, and Jawanda back into the office, where he ordered them to sit. There, in the fluorescent lights of the back room, his paranoia turned deadly. Witness accounts later described the method: each victim shot 3 times in the back of the head. The execution was cold and clinical. Investigators later said that the pattern of the wounds was deliberate, designed to make sure there were no survivors. At the time of the killings, Esther was outside with the McDougals, sitting in their car and trying to distract them with small talk. But even through the glass in the distance, she said she heard the gunfire. Later, in her interview with KOAT News, Esther had said it was at this moment, when Shane came storming out of Hollywood Video, that she realized how unstable he was. She hadn't known earlier in the night that he had been smoking crack cocaine all day. Combined with the fact that he had stopped taking his schizophrenia medication, his state of mind was volatile and frightening. She remembered the look on his face as wild-eyed, and from that point on, she said she felt like a hostage herself. Shane didn't pause after leaving the store. He ran straight to the McDougals' car, gun still in hand, and the trash bag of cash slung over his arm. He barked at Pauline to roll down the window. When she hesitated, he snapped at Esther to get her to unlock the door. Esther obeyed. From there, control shifted completely. Shane ordered George and Pauline out of the front and into the back. He slid behind the wheel, slammed the gear into drive, and pulled out of the lot. He told Esther to follow in his car. The 2 vehicles headed east, leaving Albuquerque behind as the city lights fell away. Their destination? The Sandia Mountains, a rugged, remote stretch of land where help would be scarce and darkness absolute. For the McDougals, the ride must have been terrifying. Snatched during what should have been a routine pickup for their grandson, now wedged in the back seat with a man who seems to have snapped. For Esther, the night was unraveling into something she said she never imagined when she first agreed to that robbery weeks ago. The 2 cars drove deeper into the mountains. When Shane finally pulled over on a desolate stretch, he ordered George and Pauline out of the car, driving them down into a ditch. Their hands and mouths were bound with duct tape, leaving them helpless against whatever was coming next. Esther later said she tried to intervene. She pleaded with Shane not to hurt them, even offered him the stolen surveillance tape in exchange for sparing their lives. "They're just old people," she begged. "They can't do anything to us. Please, just tie them up and leave them." But Shane ignored her. Moments later, he raised the shotgun. George and Pauline were shot multiple times. As if to erase any chance they might survive, Shane then pulled out the Tech-9 and fired again, 3 rounds into each of them. When he returned to the car, Esther claimed she tried to wrestle the weapon away from him. In the struggle, she heard a click. The gun was empty. She said later that if it had been loaded, she might have been his 6th victim that night. The discovery of the Hollywood Video crime scene was jarring in its silence. When employees arrived just after 9:30 that Sunday morning, they expected to walk into a quiet store waiting to be opened. Instead, the doors, normally locked until business hours, were ajar. Inside, the safe was empty, the registers cleared, but the real horror lay in the back office. 3 young employees, bound and lifeless. Each had been shot. It was methodical, deliberate. Detectives who responded would later admit it was one of the most brutal scenes they had ever worked. Word spread quickly through Albuquerque. For families waiting on loved ones to return from their overnight shifts, Phone calls turned into panic. For Zachary's family, that morning brought no answers. His grandparents had left their home at 2 a.m. to pick him up, but neither them nor Zach had come back home. By the next day, the unanswered questions became unbearable. Where were George and Pauline? Had they been caught up in the same violence? On March 4th, 1996, two passerbys driving east into the Sandia Mountains spotted a car abandoned on a remote road. They recognized it immediately from the news, the McDougall's vehicle. Police rushed to the scene. Inside the ditch nearby, they found George and Pauline. The news hit Albuquerque like a shockwave. 5 people murdered in less than 48 hours. 5 families shattered in a city that had never seen this kind of violence before. District Attorney Bob Schwartz would later describe it as a crime that defined a decade, one that changed the way we view living and dying. For detectives, the crime scene spoke of calculation: doors left unlocked, safes emptied, surveillance tapes missing. But the facts of the case alone couldn't explain the depth of the loss. To understand the true weight of the Hollywood Video massacre, you have to look past the evidence tags and police reports. You have to know who the victims were, their lives, their families, and the futures that were stolen. Mylene Douthey, 30 years old, was the assistant manager of Hollywood Video that night. She had lived in Arizona and Colorado before returning to Albuquerque to be closer to her family. Friends remembered her as someone who could make you laugh even on your worst days, a woman who loved dancing, thrift shopping, and cooking, especially her homemade egg rolls. She was the kind of neighbor who checked in on the elderly and the kind of friend who made problems feel solvable just by listening. Her family described her as sweet, caring, and always giving more than she took. Zachary Blacklock, 19 years old, was working late that night, saving money towards his dream of buying a car. His grandparents often drove him to and from his overnight shifts so he could put aside more of each paycheck. Though he had dropped out of high school a few credits short of graduating, Zach hadn't given up on his ambitions. He had sent a resume to Disney World and was considering art school. He loved music, photography, and drawing, creative outlets that filled his free time. His father, Ed Blacklock, recalled long talks about Zach's future and about building a savings plan. Joanda Castillo, 18 years old, had lived in Albuquerque for 13 years. She was a straight-A student and a senior at Highland High School, where she played basketball and earned a spot on the 1995 homecoming Queen Court. She was known for her kindness, often bringing sandwiches to the homeless man who slept outside the video store. Joanda's future was wide open. She was exploring nursing, auto mechanics, and had been recommended for a vocational scholarship. A friend remembered her long curly hair, her blue eyes, and her radiating beauty, saying she was just as beautiful on the inside as she was on the out. Hundreds of people turned out for her funeral, a reflection of how many lives she touched in only 18 years. George and Pauline McDougall were 77 and 74. They were grandparents who built their lives around their family. George was retired from the Santa Fe Railroad, a longtime Albuquerque resident known for his quiet dedication to those around him. Pauline was described as deeply devoted to her grandson Zachary, willing to wake up in the middle of the night to pick him up from work so he could save money for his future. Zachary's father, Ed, remembered simply, she worshipped Zach. If that meant getting up in the middle of the night to pick him up, that's what she did. For the families, the loss was immediate and permanent. But for investigators, the work was just beginning. 5 people had been executed, and the city demanded answers. From the start, detectives noticed something unusual. The front doors of Hollywood Video had been left unlocked. The safe was emptied, and in the back office, the VCR sat open. The surveillance tape, what should have been the clearest piece of evidence, was gone. Whoever committed the murders knew enough to erase their tracks. Witness accounts began to surface. An employee from the night before remembered the man pounding on the locked doors after closing, demanding to be let inside. She later identified him as Shane Harrison. The last customer, on March 3rd, also recalled something odd. A young man and woman who lingered in the store until the very end, pretending to browse. When shown a lineup, he positively identified Esther Beckley. Other tips came from even closer to the suspects. Esther's boyfriend at the time, John Lascelles, told police that Harrison and Beckley had confessed to the crimes. Two of Harrison's acquaintances recalled him bragging in the weeks before the massacre that he wouldn't leave witnesses alive during his next robbery. Detectives also began noticing cracks in Harrison's personal life. His neighbor reported that his black leather jacket had vanished the weekend of the murders and reappeared the very next day. That same neighbor had gone with Harrison to buy a shotgun, and he remembered Harrison saying outright that people would get hurt in a robbery. And then came the strongest piece of evidence. At the scene of the McDougall's murder, investigators found a fragment of metal from a car's undercarriage. When analyzed, it was matched directly to Harrison's vehicle. The pieces of the puzzle were starting to fit, pointing investigators to the pair who would soon be at the center of one of New Mexico's most infamous trials. With mounting witness accounts, circumstantial evidence, and that critical fragment from the Sandias, detectives finally had enough to move in. On March 12, 1996, just over a week after the massacre, a warrant was issued for Shane Harrison's apartment. What they found inside confirmed their worst fears. Tucked away in a black duffel bag were the very tools of the murder: the Tech-9, the shotgun, and 2 BB guns. These weren't just weapons. They were the missing links tying Harrison to both the Max Stake in the Rough robbery and the Hollywood Video massacre. The BB guns matched descriptions that were given by the robbery victim. The shotgun and Tech-9 were matched to the wounds left on the McDougals. With this, Shane Harrison was arrested. In custody, he admitted to buying the guns, but tried to shift blame onto Beckley and even Lascelles, claiming they had carried out the killings without him. It was a story investigators didn't buy. Esther Beckley was picked up soon after. Facing the possibility of the death penalty herself, she quickly agreed to a plea deal: 2 life sentences plus 35 years, in exchange for her full testimony against Harrison. The net was closing, and prosecutors were preparing to bring Shane Glenn Harrison to trial. The trial of Shane Glenn Harrison began in late 1997 and drew national attention as one of the most chilling cases New Mexico had ever seen. He faced 19 felony counts, 5 counts of murder, multiple charges of armed robbery, kidnapping, conspiracy, and tampering with evidence. At the heart of the prosecution's case was Esther Beckley. Having secured a plea deal, she laid out the entire timeline: how she and Harrison robbed Max Stake in the Rough with BB guns, how Harrison escalated to real firearms, and how the Hollywood Video massacre unfolded. She admitted her own role, but portrayed herself as powerless to stop him. Beckley told jurors that Harrison was the only one who pulled the trigger, while she followed his instructions out of fear. Prosecutors backed up her account with hard evidence: the duffel bag, the guns, and the fragment of car left behind in the Sandias. Other acquaintances testified that Harrison bragged he would never leave witnesses again, which confirmed his violent intent. Harrison, for his part, chose to testify in his own defense. He admitted buying the weapons, but denied pulling the trigger, attempting to pin the murders on Beckley and even on her boyfriend. The jury didn't believe him. On December 23, 1997, the verdict came back: guilty on 19 counts. Jurors deadlocked on 3 of the murder charges tied to the store employees, sparing him the death penalty. But the outcome was still decisive. The court sentenced Harrison to 2 consecutive life terms, plus an additional 198 years, 258 years in total. He would never walk free again. Esther Beckley, for her cooperation, received 2 life sentences, plus 35 years. Her deal removed the possibility of execution, but it ensured she would spend the rest of her life behind bars. With Harrison sentenced to more than 2 lifetimes in prison and Beckley condemned to her own, the legal chapter of the Hollywood Video case came to an end. But for the families, there was no real closure, only the quiet absence of the people they loved. The massacre shook Albuquerque in 1996, not just for its brutality, but for how ordinary it began. 5 lives ended in senseless violence, and a community was left asking whether it could have been prevented. I want to take a moment to thank those who spoke with me about the victims for sharing their memories and helping me see them as more than just case files. Thank you for listening to Grave Whispers. The story of the Hollywood Video Massacre is one of violence, loss, and questions that still linger. I understand that prison populations rise, especially in states with higher crime rates, but violent offenders should never have been considered for release. Decisions made in the name of reform placed people like Shane Harris and Esther Beckley back on the streets, with devastating consequences. I also find it hard to believe that the jury could not come to a unanimous agreement that Harrison and Beckley killed the video store employees, even with all the evidence. Until next time, keep questioning and keep listening for the whispers.